This is the Earth to World Broadcasting Network.
Well, we should all look forward to the remarks of our next speaker because it's Brian Miles. Brian is a CPM, CCIM, and former SMI Commercial Real Estate. He formed SMI Commercial Real Estate LLC along with Catherine G. Miles in August of 2004. Brian specializes in multifamily and investment brokerage. Prior to 4 years with Coldwell Banker, Brian spent 10 years as a property manager, specializing in apartments, and a principal with Shelter Management in Salem. Now it's time for some straight talk about the Willamette Valley from none other than Mr. Brian Miles.
Thank you. Well, good morning. As always, it's really nice to be here. And like you guys, I like to come up and hear what Mark and Amy have to say, and then I can kind of twist everything. I'm always glad when I come behind them so that I can change my speech entirely so I match up. So the Southern Valley really has some great things happening right now, and I'm happy to say that we finally have some new construction all the way from Salem all the way to Eugene. And on the brokerage side, we're busier than we've been in the last 24, 28 months. But first, I always want to touch on the vacancy, and as you guys can see from the Metro reports on your tables, well, quite honestly, there's not a whole lot of it, and anywhere, it doesn't really seem to matter where you are in the valley, it's pretty low. The university towns, they all hold the trump cards. Their vacancy is obscenely low, and their continued growth enrollment has been a real blessing to those marketplaces. And of course, that impact is then felt within their entire communities and not just around the campuses. You know, I wish I could say that rents were really starting to heat up and we were getting crazy with them, but we're not, and at least we're not yet. There are certainly properties that are enjoying rent increases, and most of those properties are in those same college towns. But wholesale across the board increases, well, we're just not there yet. You know, the point where you're happy to receive the 30-day notice because you know you're going to jack up the rent even higher? Well, we're getting closer, I hope, but not yet. Now, 6 months ago, we were up here talking about all the pending, or I was talking about the pending construction coming down the valley, and that's really what we have now. We have a lot of new construction, and it's at all sorts of various stages, from coming out of the ground to the planning to the financing. Every town has a project or two at the minimum, and mind you, when you don't have very much new construction, a lot is a relevant term. But in Salem Kaiser, there are a lot of projects. There's a 36 unit that was a second phase to an existing project in the south end that is under construction. There's 180 units that just finished up as a second phase to a project in the north end. There's at least 4 more fairly large projects in the discussion phasing right now. If everything was to actually be done, we would certainly see well over 700, 800 units in that marketplace. There are new units in Monmouth, just west of Salem, home of Western Oregon University. They're actually in construction right now. Albany has 2 sites that are in the discussion. If those come out of the ground, they'll add an additional 200 plus units to their marketplace. Corvallis has a large project that I love calling it, it's in the fight with the community / city stage. It's called the Harrison Apartments. It's only 91 units, but it's 271 bedrooms. Consequently, there's their fight. Eugene has a monster that's in the fight with the city / community phases right now. It's 351 units. It's going to house 1,200 students in one location. Somebody out there is going to manage that thing. That one aside, there's a lot of different projects in Springfield and Eugene coming up. The University of Oregon is just finishing up dorms right next door, brand new dorms next to Matthew Knight Arena. Even Lane Community College has a project downtown that is going to be at the downtown campus. It's going to house up to 250 students. And as I stated, all these college towns, they hold the trump, but they also have to fight for everything. The neighborhood associations are really wreaking havoc on these developers. Now, I understand this is not uncommon. It was new to me when I read about this, but in Eugene, that big monster I was talking about, there was 3 affected neighborhood associations. So they got together, came to the developer and said, tell you what, you pay us X amount of dollars and we'll give you our blessing and step back. And the developer, of course, he called it what it was, extortion, said no, so they are going to continue to fight, and who knows where they're going to get with that. So what does all this mean to Southern Valley? What's the impact going to be? Can we absorb the new units? Are we going to see concessions come back? They took a little bit of a hiatus, and so we may see them come back. Obviously, there's that nasty unemployment. So who's going to fill these things up, and how are they going to pay for the rent, the higher rent that's required for the new construction? We probably will see some impact on older units. We've talked about that before. We definitely will see some concessions, I'm sure, as was mentioned, because they need to fill them up. But all in all, it really shouldn't be too bad, if nothing else, just because we don't have hundreds of units opening up in any given location at one time. Those rent-ups are going to be pretty well spread out. And of course, if history is any kind of a good teacher, well, we need these. These rent increases will drive up the rent rolls of all our other units. And honestly, a lot of landlords down the valley are afraid to raise those rents for fear of vacancy. So after a few years of no construction, I, for one, am really happy to see it. And again, we need that to push our rents, so we're kind of getting kicked in the butt and getting a little spur of our apartment economy, if you will, from them. Now, certainly I hear some grumbling from other landlords. They're concerned that we're going to overbuild, flood the market, and overnight bring down the entire structure of apartments everywhere. Now, that's probably not going to happen, because these same landlords were grousing pretty loudly when the economy crashed and high unemployment hit us, and yet we've seemed to survive that very well, as has been mentioned many times. So all the indicators absolutely point that we need new units, and so we're finally getting them. And in the last 5 years or more, we've had sub 5% vacancy down the valley, and so we haven't seen any rent increases to speak of. So I really feel like these new units are going to help push that. Now, I got a phone call the other day. I really felt like this was a good point to bring this in. And remember, we're not metro. We're spread out. So one of my clients called. He's got units in the outlying areas, 10 to 15 miles. And so he calls and he says, hey, Brian, what do you think that gas is going to impact my units? I've had this conversation and talked about it before, but really never spent a lot of time thinking about it. But for instance, Albany, Independence, Monmouth, even South Salem have always benefited from Corvallis's higher rents. And that's a pretty far drive. There's no busing system that's going to haul those kids down there. So they're driving and they're paying that gas. So will they move closer to Corvallis? What about the guy that's in one of these outlying areas that's driving into one of the metropolitan areas, if you will, off the I-5? Is he going to keep feeding the gas pump a large portion or larger portion of his paycheck, or will he move in? Well, I didn't have an answer for him, although I felt like, that really does bear watching at this point. And I think the thing that really kind of hit it home for me was, he asked me this, and I'll ask you guys. If you were shopping for an apartment complex today, how far off the I-5 corridor would you guys be willing to look? You got to think about it. So, last time I was up here, I talked about getting our older units ready to compete, and I still stand by that. So on the other extreme, I met with a gentleman who built the Taj Mahal of units. I mean, for Salem, Oregon, they are absolutely the cream of the crop. Granite, stainless steel, I mean, these things are beautiful. So I go there to meet with him to talk about his rents and what that prospective price might be. We were so far apart on the rent and the value, it was ridiculous. And I felt really, really badly for him until he stopped me and he said, hey, wait a minute. My accountant told me there's lots of people out there willing to buy at a loss or just to break even for properties. And so I looked at him and I said, maybe you need to go back to your accountant and ask him to buy that property from you. So this poor guy should have talked to somebody in the industry before he jumped. After I met him, I'm not so sure he would have changed his mind. However, he should have talked to somebody because he's going to learn it the hard way. Now, on occasion, I'm wrong, and I understand that, and when I don't understand it, my wife reminds me of it. But I like to think sometimes I'm right as well, maybe more often than not. And you guys have heard me talk about my kids and, you know, the value of a dollar and paying their rent, and it's not just I like their candy, you know, there's a purpose behind it, and I do it because I love them and I want the best for them. So recently, when my son asked his older sister to pepper spray him, I suggested that probably really wasn't a good idea. So the first time ever, I finally brought a picture. Hopefully I did. There's my beautiful son after pepper spray. And for you Beaver fans, it's not just because you're wearing an Oregon shirt does not mean you should automatically be pepper sprayed, let me tell you. So as I'm finishing up here and I'm looking around at all these apartment professionals, I recognize, as you guys do, sometimes our clients will listen to us, sometimes they won't. And the ones that choose not to listen to us, well, maybe they're just looking for a little pepper spray. You guys have a great day.
This is the Earth to World Broadcasting Network.